Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Chaucer's virtual author discussion with author Sharon Cameron. I'm Michael Takeuchi, and I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Books, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California, and owned and founded by our founder, Mari Curley. To purchase tonight's book, to browse other titles, or to check out our upcoming events, please go to our website at chaucersbooks.com. Tomorrow, we welcome Lawrence Spann, and on Thursday, a fellow local author, Lauren Schneider, will be hosting her virtual events. Next week, Chaucer's will go live for the first time in 20 months with a couple of offsite events, starting with the talented young writer Via Bleidner, who will be in conversation with author and teacher Ellen O'Connell-Whitted at 4:30 p.m. at UCSB. Then on the following Sunday, the 24th, 2 p.m., we'll host Congressman Adam Schiff at Crush Bar and Tap in Santa Barbara. While our guests are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's event is being simulcasted on and recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available to view after program's completion. So let's begin. Tonight, we welcome Sharon Cameron. Sharon Cameron's debut novel, The Dark Unwinding, was awarded the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Sue Alexander Award for Promising New Work, and SCBWI Crystal Kite Award, and was named a YALSA Fiction for Young Adult selection. Sharon is also the author of its sequel, A Spark Unseen, Rook, which was selected as an IndieBound Indie Next List Top 10 selection, a YALSA Best Fiction for Young Adult selection, and a Parents' Choice Gold medalist. And The Forgetting, a #1 New York Times bestseller and an Indie Next pick of the list selection, and its companion novel, The Knowing. The Light in Hidden Places received 2-star reviews, was a Reese YA Book Club pick, and received fantastic media coverage for Sharon's strong research and affecting prose. It is sold in an amazing 14 languages. Sharon lives with her family in Nashville, Tennessee, and can be found at SharonCameron'sBooks.com. Before we bring our guests out, I'd like to bring out our Kids Room Associate Extraordinaire, Suzanne Rorick. Come on out, Suzanne. Hello.
Oh, I think you mean
so you've read more YA titles than one can count. We call you the queen, the teen queen of the store. But Sharon Cameron was at the top of your list in desired authors to get on here. And I was just wondering, what appeals to you most about her writing?
I think just that she appeals across the board. She's an amazing sci-fi fantasy author, but she's also an amazing historical fiction author. And basically reading all of her books makes me realize that there are certain themes that just transcend all genres, and she hits that home like really well, and she's an amazing author.
Wow. And you're loving this new book, aren't you?
Yes, the new book is amazing. Her last book was amazing. I'm still a total fangirl over The Forgetting, which I still recommend all the time, even though it came out like 5 or 6 years ago, I think. So yeah, I love everything I've read by her for sure.
That's great. Well, shall we bring Sharon out now?
I mean, I guess so. Otherwise.
Come on out, Sharon.
Gosh. Hello. That was an absolutely lovely introduction. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I recommended your books, like I think since I started at Chaucer's like 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah.
Gosh, you can't tell me how much. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate knowing that. It's kind of thrilling. Thank you.
And Bluebird's amazing. I read it, I think, in almost just one night, my son is like, "Why are you still up?" And I'm like, "I have to finish this book." So go to sleep.
That's really one of my goals in life is to make people stay up too late. So I feel like I have accomplished what I set out to do. Thank you.
Sure. Did you want to tell us a little bit about what it means to you? What the basic story is?
Yeah, I'll be happy to tell you a little bit about Bluebird. So Bluebird is basically the story of Eva, who is a German immigrant coming to New York City in 1946. So she is running from the fires of one war, but stepping straight into another far colder one. But Eva isn't coming to New York to start a new life. She is seeking justice and a Nazi who has slipped its net. And she's bringing a secret with her. And that secret is the secret of Project Bluebird. And that is something that neither she nor the Soviets nor the Americans should ever have.
Right. It's an incredibly interesting concept. And the fact that you've tied a few different historical things together to bring it about was really interesting. And yeah, you're exploring the post-war as opposed to, the standard kind of World War II era is really, really interesting.
Well, yeah, I really, I guess I'll just start by saying that I was really interested in the strange juxtaposition of two pieces of pretty forgotten, I think, American history, and they both shocked me, and for utterly opposite reasons.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I got excited because I said the same thing. I'm like, they're both shocking, but one is horribly shocking and one is amazingly shocking.
Right. Both fascinating, both forgotten, but so opposite each other. So the first is Powell House. And Powell House was a program being run by the American Friends Service Committee, so the AFSC, and that is the civil service wing of the Quakers. And so this was being run by Quaker volunteers in an exclusive mansion that had been lent to them on the Upper East Side of New York. And the purpose of the program was to provide practical help, friendship, and unconditional love to the refugees of war. And they did this in a way that was multi-religious, that was racial. A program that brought together the Jewish Women's Council, the Protestant churches, Catholic churches, the African American churches of Harlem, the Urban League, universities, the Guggenheim, everybody, government agencies, everybody was involved in coming together in and extending help to people who really needed it. And there was no help too big or too small. If you needed a suit of clothes, if you needed English classes, if you needed a job, an apartment, if you needed citizenship classes, if you needed a friend, that is what they were there to provide. And basically it was a program that was so far ahead of its time in terms of social justice that it was difficult for me to believe that had ever even existed, but it did. And then the second piece of forgotten American history was Project Bluebird. And Project Bluebird was a secret CIA operation begun just after the defeat of Germany. And the purpose of this program was to continue some of the horrific and incredibly inhumane medical and psychological experimentation that had been going on in the concentration camps. And what they were trying to do was split the human personality and gain control of the human mind. They wanted to create the perfect spies and assassins. So spies that did not know they were spies, killers that did not know they were killers. And it sounds like science fiction or like the Manchurian Candidate, kind of stuff, but these experiments were real. They were done on unwitting, unconsenting American citizens. And I believe that our government was paying Nazi war criminals to do them. And it was horrifying. and shocking
Right.
to know.
Right. And we think about that happening like America. I know. Are you getting the curve? Sorry.
Yes, you're coming in and out just a little bit. That's okay. That's okay. Just go ahead and say it again.
We think about that happening in South America with the escaped Nazi war criminals. We don't think about it happening here. So that's a really
right. Or that our government was involved. You know, I've always thought of the Americans as the good guys, you know, of World War II, and we were. You know, we helped defeat Hitler. We liberated the concentration camps. You know, we did some things that needed to be done, but I think it's really important to acknowledge the nuances of our history. You know, there were also areas that we did not do what was okay, and it was really because of fear of the Soviets. We believed that the Soviets might already have this ability.
Absolutely, and we're like, oh, we'll take you as allies now, but as soon as we've won the war, we're a little worried about you. We need to get ahead of you.
Well, you know, Stalin was something to worry about. You know, Stalin was a worry, and that was a legitimate worry. But, you know, I think it brings into question, you know, what is okay and what is not okay for the greater good. And I think we definitely crossed those lines.
Definitely. The greater good is something that we always kind of joke about, just because I don't know if you've seen Hot Fuzz, but we're always like the greater good. But
one of my favorite movies.
I mean, greater good. I know that's not in Scotland, but it always kind of like has the evocative.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's definitely a really interesting issue, and it's hard to really, and I feel like in the book they make it very clear, like, what is the right thing to do, who gets to decide what the right thing to do is, and we still don't know that.
I think you know, like what I like to do in most of my books, you know, is or what I try to do is present a question, you know, and one of those questions in Bluebird is, what is justice? And who is in charge of justice? Who gets to decide what true justice is? And I think it really is up to the reader to answer the questions. Yeah.
I'm trying to think what the two lines are that get repeated in a really effective way. I think like it's fair is fair, and it's always good to know.
Yes.
And absolutely. So it's great. And you definitely brought out those parts of history that I wasn't aware of at all. There are other things that are spoilery, so I'm not going to mention them, but also very interesting. And also just coming from the point of view of an actual like daughter of the Nazi class, basically, and just the fact that she didn't know what was going on, and then finding out was just like devastating. And also we hear about like
I was just gonna say that even before I was looking at you know, the juxtaposition of these two pieces of history with Powell House and Bluebird, and you know, the heights and depths of, you know, the human beings can go to. But one of the other things that I looked at that really came out of my research for Light and Hidden Places, my previous book before Bluebird, that centered around a Polish Catholic rescuer of Jewish people during World War II. And when I was researching that book, one of the things that I really wanted to do was understand the German view of the war. You know, she was in an occupied city in Poland, and so it's full of German soldiers, and I wanted to really think about those soldiers and think about who was all in with Hitler, who wasn't all in with Hitler, who was being forced to be there as well, even as a German soldier. And so I started looking at oral histories, in recorded interviews of Germans and their view of World War II. And it was absolutely fascinating stuff to listen to. But what really, really struck me listening to all of these oral histories was the teenagers, girls who had been teenagers at Germany during Germany's defeat. And that meant that they had grown up in the world of the Third Reich. They had grown up under Hitler, going to the Hitler youth meetings. This was their world. And they had no concept, really, as young people do not often, that there was a world outside of that experience. And so when Germany was defeated, and the horrible things that happened as the Soviet armies, came through, and suicide was being encouraged over the radio by the German government. These girls, their world inverted, their world turned upside down, and at different times, each of them had to come to the moment where they realized, I've been standing on the wrong side of history. I have been involved in something monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a profound realization, to step back and have to look at yourself and realize what it meant, what all these things meant that you were either knowingly or unknowingly involved in, depending on your situation. And for some of these girls, it meant understanding that not only had they involved, but the father that loved them or dawdled them on his knee, their loving father, ran a concentration camp, was a murderer of men, women, and children. That parents were monsters, friends were it was a terrible realization. And some of them, the way they handled this was very interesting. For some, it was deny. They could not cope with this information. And for others, it was a lifetime of guilt that they lived with, a horrific guilt. And then others made the choice to become agents of change. And I think that is what interested me so much, is what is that capacity in human beings to completely transform ourselves. And so ultimately, the story I wanted to write, I think, was one of transformation, that shows what we really can choose, that we really can choose to be who we decide to be.
And that came across really well. I loved the metaphor of the Bluebird, how you worked it in with like little in between chapters. I loved how the ending was happy, but it wasn't perfect. Like there were things that were still really wrong, and you're like,
Well,
and obviously spoilers, but yeah, like I loved how you made it a happy ending, but you made the reader work for it, basically, and you made the main character work for it, which is unusual. And
well, the truth of life is that happiness doesn't often fall in our laps. We have to choose it, we have to work for it, and it's not perfect. It, like, the world doesn't end up perfect. And
absolutely,
if it does for you, that's great. I want to hear all about it, because it doesn't for me. Yeah.
I would look at Instagram and Facebook, because that can't possibly be true.
Oh, we'll talk later.
It was like, it's the happy ending. Why are there like however many more pages? It's like, oh, because she still has growing to do.
And yeah, like we all do. We should never stop that process. There's never a time, I think sometimes when you get to a happy ending in a book, it makes you feel like, oh, they've achieved everything they need to achieve. When is this time that human beings have achieved everything that they need to achieve? We're always growing, we're always changing, we're always striving, and that is the way it should be.
Well, especially in a YA novel, just like kids reading like, oh, happily ever after when you're 17 or 18. No.
There's a lot more to your story than that. It's like when I work a lot with new writers and pre-published writers, and a lot of times the goal in everyone's mind that getting published is this, enormous milestone, and it feels like that's all you're striving for.
Yep.
And the truth is that all the knowledge doesn't rain down on your head when you get a publishing deal, and it's just one milestone in a really awesome journey. It's not the end. You've got a lot more learning, to do at that point, and hopefully you never stop
Right.
doing that. So
it's awesome. And yeah, Bluebird, there was definitely horrific things in it, especially psychologically, but it was still a thriller. It was still, I don't want to say fun to read, but it was a quick, fun read. And then there are books like Light and Hidden Places that are really amazing and hard to read.
yes.
So yeah,
as it should be, because it was a very true story based on a very true life, and that was a hard road that Stefania Podgorska chose. So
yeah, that was going to be one of my big questions, was just like, it was so hard for me to read. Like, how hard was it for you to write?
yeah, it was. I can honestly say that writing The Light in Hidden Places was a life-changing experience for me. Stefania Podgorska has been my hero for many, many years, long before I had ever considered writing or anything along those lines. And later in my life, when I decided to search for her, and I had no idea the journey I was starting on. I got to meet Stefania Podgorska in the last months of her life. I ended up having a really beautiful friendship with her son, who shared, so many of the family stories with me, and his mom's unpublished memoir, and was really just instrumental. And my husband and Ed, Stefania's son, and I all went to Poland together to research his mom's life, and we got to meet Helena, the little sister, who was just as much of a hero as Stefania. We got to meet one of the children who had been hidden in the attic. We got to stand in the attic space and walk the streets of Przemyśl, and it was just it was a life-changing experience for me, because one of the things we did is we visited Auschwitz, and we did the tour, that people do of the Auschwitz concentration camp. And part of that tour is they take you through the changing rooms and into the gas chamber, and you're in a small group, and they have you stand in the gas chamber in silence for 4 or 5 minutes. And it's very dark, and it's stained concrete walls, very dank, and it stinks in there, and it will probably always stink in there. It is by far the most horrible place I've ever stood in. And I stood there and I realized, here I am. I felt like I'm certainly not an expert in any area, but I'm a historian. I thought I knew what happened in the concentration camps. I've read Hitler's speeches. I'd listened to all these oral histories. I've done all of this collecting of knowledge about what happened in the concentration camps. And I stood in those gas chambers and realized I knew nothing about the Holocaust. Nothing. Because I knew a lot of facts, but I had not felt it. Not the way I really, really needed to. And after going to Poland, the kind of book that I wanted to write changed. I thought that I wanted to write a book about my hero, Stefania Podgorska, and the incredible bravery and humanity that she showed at such a young age and in such a difficult situation. And I wanted everybody to know what she did during the war. But when I left Poland, I realized that's not what I wanted at all. I wanted readers to feel what she felt during the war. And I wanted readers to walk those decisions with her, every one of those difficult decisions, because yes, even though that's hard, and it was hard to write because it meant so much to me, and I laid a lot of expectations on that because it meant a lot to me, and I wanted to honor her memory, by what I was doing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I
Sorry.
I really, yeah, I wanted that feeling to be a challenge. These stories, Bluebird and Light in Hidden Places, they should not be about the past. They're actually about right now. They're about the world right now, because the hatred that created,
Absolutely.
Project Bluebird, that created the Holocaust, that did not die with Hitler. That did not end with the war. It's alive and well in the world. And so the challenge of these stories is, okay, this is what happened before. What are you going to do about it today? That is the question that I hope these stories present. And and I think we have to feel it in order to challenge ourselves with that question, because the facts just aren't enough. So I hope that's what the books do, because that's what I
Absolutely.
want them to do.
And my fellow kids room employee is Jewish, and she still deals with that fear and that, not guilt, but like just that generational,
Hmm.
yeah, to this day. And I think, yeah, authors, and by extension in our small way, booksellers, like we are the ones who are trying to keep that, in people's consciousness. And that's part of the reason that I love your books and like want to, get them out there as much as possible. Because yeah, I don't think people know, and they need to.
Well, and stories are such a powerful medium, and it's a medium that I so strongly believe in. We are made as human beings to respond to story. And so I just think it's not the only way, but it is a great way um, to uh, to challenge ourselves and to understand what's come before so that we can interpret where we are.
Absolutely. Can I just say one thing really quick, just because I love the forgetting so much, because it kind of ties into
Yes,
this.
please. Yes.
The yeah, forcibly making people forget things to create the perfect society. Like it all ties back in. And I don't want to spoil that too much, even though it's been out for a while, but like it's amazing how these themes go across all genres. And like, yeah, just
I think it's interesting that I think, and it's so different for different authors, and I think that's why we need so many different kinds of authors, from every walk of life, because everybody brings a different passion to the table, and to their writing, and these are themes, that I'm passionate about. I don't want to forget what has come before us. I want to, and so much of it has been forgotten. I want to reach back and grab, as much of that as we can before it dies in people's memories. When I was writing, or before I was writing The Forgetting, when I was first, sort of wrestling with these concepts, I researching our family history is something that I work on a lot. And there was a piece of my family history that I uncovered that had been somewhat kept a secret. And I uncovered it, and I discovered that my fifth great grandmother was a slave, and nobody had talked about this, and nobody and it was because I've discovered this piece of history. It tied me again, like almost exactly what I'm talking about with when I was talking about the concentration camps. It tied me to a piece of history that I knew all about,
right.
except now it's also, part of me. And I thought I almost missed that. It absolutely enriched my life and made me better. And since then I've met my cousins of color who are just like some of my favorite people in the world, and we love each other very much, and it's been such a wonderful, wonderful thing that was this close to being gone because it would have died in someone's memory. And I think that's really what prompted me to think, what is it that makes us who we are? Is it, are we still the same person if we don't know all these things? Are we better if we do know all these things? Are we who we are because of our experiences or because of our DNA? Where do we find those things, and what would we do if all that history and experience was taken away from us? And that's really what prompted it. And I think these themes, are just things that of not forgetting the past, of honoring what should be honored in the past, of acknowledging what was wrong in the past and not being defined by that, and using that to interpret and understand our present and challenge our present, is something that just sort of it just comes out. you can't help it, and that's why I can't help it, and that is why that's why we need so many different authors, to bring all of these different ideas, to the table, and these different kinds of voices to the table.
Well, and they're just such universal themes that, like, when I went back and like reread The Forgetting, because it was time, I wanted to, it's an amazing book. I was like, oh my God, this theme of like not being able to trust your parent, not being able to trust your culture, like being like forced to forget, basically, like being lied to. It's really strong.
What is the truth? What is the truth?
Yeah. And it is so weird, like, seeing kids nowadays who are being like taught 9/11 in school because that's history to them. Like, do they remember? Like, because I remember going to the Holocaust Museum when I was 16 or 17 and being like horrified, but I don't think really have that experience anymore. Like, generationally, it's strange.
It is, and I'm sure every generation has felt that way about the generation that's coming after them, and so I think that's why we just have to keep these things alive, in the best ways that we can. I like to poke around antique malls a lot, imagine that. And I've actually started to see some of my childhood toys as antiques in the antique mall. Like, oh no, now I'm old.
Yeah, when your favorite song from the 90s comes on the radio is an oldie, you're like, no.
And see, somewhere in my head, the 90s are like the future. So I can still remember the 90s being like way up here, the future that was coming. It would be so
sorry. I was talking to my friend about O'Brien when he did in the year 2000. I was like, that was 21 years ago.
I know, it blows my mind. Oh gosh. Now now we probably need to talk about something else, or I'm gonna get slightly depressed.
I don't know if Mike is trying to tell me I should do Q&As or something. I think I have a question. Let's see.
Okay.
Oop. Okay, so from Ruby, I've got, you write fiction, but seem to do a lot more research than most. How much research do you put into your work?
Oh, wow. How much research do I not put into my work? I do a lot. I do a lot of research, and I do actually just as much research for my fantasy and sci-fi, the dystopian, anything I've written, I've actually done almost the same amount of research for, even for the historical, because I always base what I'm writing in history and something that has been, even if I'm putting a different spin on it than what really happened. I always ground it in that, because I think when you take a fantasy and you ground it in the reality of the human story, it's just automatically relatable. It you can just feel that reality, and it makes the world believable. And so I always take just as much time and care to delve into and hook into some area of the past, even in a fantasy. For Light and Hidden Places and for Bluebird, there are people in those books that are still alive. And that is that is an incredibly weighty responsibility, I feel like. When I was researching Bluebird, I was actually able to stay with the daughter of Elizabeth Whittlesby, who is in the book, who was the program director of Powell House. And she took me to meet Patricia Hunt, who was a 99-year-old Quaker. She's about to turn 101 now. And she is Patricia in the book of Sky Island. And, she shared all of her memories with me. And so, you just want to cross all your T's and dot all those I's, because these are not just characters, these are real people who are going to be reading themselves in your book. And while you can't make life is not a novel, so you have to create a novel out of life. But I try to be so careful to be as correct as I can be in a narrative. So that was a really long way of saying I do a lot of research.
Right. And Lightning in Places, like, I knew was based on a true story and true people. So it was really interesting when I got to the end of Bluebird and I realized that a lot of those people were also real people, because I had no idea on that one. I thought that one was more of a full-on, just, kind of.
Exactly. Actually, everyone in Powell House in the books is based on a real person. And there were a few little changes I made, especially if I had not spoken with that family. I elected in some cases not to use last names and that kind of thing if I hadn't. But all of this, I had so much incredible information. The archives of the American Friends Service Committee, there's a wonderful archivist there who helped me and brought me box after box after box of meticulously kept records of Powell House. It was absolutely a writer's dream. It was a treasure trove. So I was able to, I had diaries of the girls who were there. I had immigrant case studies. I knew the color of the walls. I knew the taxes. I knew everybody's salary. I knew, I had a floor plan. Like, I had photographs. I had everything. And even an unpublished memoir on the beginnings of how Powell House got started. And every program that is depicted in the book was one that was real. That is the way the program was run, and all of the people were real. So I really did want to honor them, because they did so much quiet good in the world. And I think we'll never know the extent of that good that was just quietly done. And they were lives very well lived. And so I wanted to honor that.
Right. And the fact that they were helping Jewish people, but they were also not closing their doors to a German girl who escaped, whereas, like, soldiers were spitting on her in, like, one of the first chapters. So she didn't trust that people were being kind to her. Like, why were they being kind to her? Like, she just assumed they had an agenda, but they didn't. And that's amazing.
Yes, and that is the way, that's the way the American Friends Service Committee worked. They did not know race, they did not know religion, they did not know politics. There were no political enemies. People have no boundaries. It was really about extending that kind of unconditional love to everyone, and it is absolutely a lesson that we could take to heart now.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, if I'm looking to the side, it's because my cat is crazy and is just like.
I've got a cat over here as well on this side, and I'm just waiting for him to do something weird, but so far just been asleep. So
mine is being very weird. I've been very much trying to be like, don't look. Don't
look at that cat. That's funny.
Okay, I have to look. Don't do that. Okay, sorry. Let me see. It looks like there are a couple more questions.
Okay.
Okay, so Paul says, sci-fi to historical fiction. Wow, how do you pick your stories / genres?
Yeah, so I've never actually chosen my genre. I think that the story kind of chooses me, probably more than the other way around, and it just happens to be the genre that it is. I think that's just kind of the way it's happened, because I'm more about the art of the story than trying to make the story into something in particular that I want to sell, or something particular that I want to say. So I always go for what I am passionate about. Whatever that is, sometimes it might be a setting, it might be a theme. For my first book, it was definitely the setting, which was Welbeck Abbey. It was just, I was amazed by that place, and it was such an awesome setting for a story, and I couldn't learn enough about it. And when you're at that place where you can't learn enough about it, where you don't want to stop researching about it, you can't stop talking about it. That's usually when I know that there's probably a story in there somewhere that I really want to tell. And I really do believe in tapping into that passion. And I'm actually not even talking about writing right now. Like, it could be anything. It could be music, it could be business, it could be whatever it is that you are really, really passionate about. But there is something about tapping into that and putting that out into the world. For me, when I tap into that, there's some kind of weird mystic magical process that happens where it comes out of me and it goes onto the page, and then that comes out of the page and into the reader. And I don't understand what this magical process is, except that it's real. I didn't realize it was real until I started writing. And I realized, I've been such a reader all my life. And I think that's what I've been doing, is tapping in to other people's passions all my life. I've been grabbing them out of the books where they got poured out onto the page, and I've been on the other end. And now I'm putting it out, in a slightly different way. And it's really, I think it's a beautiful process that's been going on since the beginning of time with creativity. But I really do think that for me, the work of creating a book is never going to be worth it without that joy and that excitement for whatever it is that's drawing me to that story in the first place. And hopefully that's what people feel as they read it. Hopefully they're catching it the way I always was and still do when I'm reading.
Absolutely. That's really inspiring. And like rereading The Forgetting, like I work in the kids' room and I read mostly YA. So I'm like, I want to write YA. And just rereading The Forgetting, I'm like, this is why I want to rewrite, or like why I want to write YA. So, and I think I see The Reader on your shelf behind you by Is that back there? Is that also a sci-fi concept?
Which one is it? Oh yes, Tracy Keys. I'm sure it is back there on my shelf. Yeah. Yes, she's a lovely friend.
I thought, I was like, that's so.
I know you are in my fiction section of my room right here, but I've got some of my books in front, so you won't forget what my covers look like.
Oh yeah, no, it's like I feel like that's a compulsive thing for both authors, booksellers, like anybody who loves books. Like I have to look at the bookshelf.
What are you reading? I do it every time people are on. I'm freezing the thing, like, what's on your shelves? Absolutely.
I think there's one more question. Let me check. Tommy says, as a writer, do you rely on a community of writers to support you, or are you more of a lone wolf?
Oh, I rely on a community, 100%. A lot of writing is solitary, for sure. You spend a lot of time in your own head, getting those words down onto a page, but that has to get balanced with a community. And it is so incredibly helpful to be able to commune with other people who understand what that creative process is like. It's huge. For me here in Nashville, that has been primarily through SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. We have an incredibly vibrant community here in Nashville. My dearest friends are there now. I can't imagine, my life without them. When I very first started writing, one of the first things that happened is I found a critique group. And I've had the critique group now for 16 years. And we still read each other's work and we still critique each other's work. And they really taught me how to write. And I don't know how I would have gotten to where I am today without that support and without the cheerleading when I needed it, without the, no, this is really actually boring and you need to rewrite it. I don't know where I would have gotten without having that incredible constructive support and friendship. So I think it's essential to find that right place somewhere.
That's definitely great to hear, because whenever I hear critique group, I'm like, oh dear God, that's terrifying. I don't want anybody else to read my work except, people after I published it. They've already bought it.
It is terrifying, actually. Except for sending my manuscript to Helena Podgorska, I can't remember anything scarier than sending out my manuscript to my critique group the very, very first time, because I'd never let anyone read my work before, and I hadn't been writing very long either. So I didn't know if it was all right. It was really kind of wasn't, but that's not the point. I was just getting started, but it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. But it's a vulnerable place. You put yourself in. When you tap into that passion that I was talking about, you're taking a little piece of your soul, and you're putting it out on the page, and you're having to be okay with other people looking at that and saying,
right,
yes, no, but that does get easier, but it's very vulnerable, and it takes a lot of courage. And it's certainly a courage that I've had to learn.
Right. And that's going to make you better as an author too, just like getting that vulnerability and that building that courage and everything. So,
well, yeah. and no author has a good perspective on their own work. You're too close to your own work. It's like trying to see something right here and see it clearly. You can't, it's not in focus. So you really do have to have outside eyes on your work, and it needs to be outside eyes that are as serious about your work as you are about your work, who are going to think deeply about your work, and who are going to give you criticism in a constructive and encouraging way. The point is to build you up, not tear you down, but it's also to tell you the truth. You have to be told the truth. And the truth is that, right, most writing is terrible until you get to the 8th, 9th, 10th revision. It doesn't get good. My first drafts stink. Everybody's do, so you have to get to those 8th, 9th, 10th revisions to really start getting to something, that is where you want it to be. And it takes outside eyes. Yeah. It really does.
That makes a lot of sense, even though it's terrifying.
And it's terrifying at the same time. Absolutely.
Right. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about specifically, or I don't want to keep you up too late, because I know it's a lot later there than it is here.
It's a little later here, but it's not too bad. I think I guess I just hope, that anyone who's reading any of my books, but particularly Bluebird, the new book, it really is. I think in the end, what it meant to me, when I was writing, is it just showed me that there was a balance. A lot of Bluebird was written during lockdown. We were in the height of the first lockdowns of the pandemic. The country was, the elections were coming. The country was incredibly divided. All the racial unrest that was happening. It was a very oppressive time, and it was a very fearful time.
It was.
Where we're going, of what other people were doing for your own health. It was just and those kinds of stresses, they really do put a cork in your creativity. It doesn't allow that to flow very well. So it was very frustrating and very oppressive feeling. And maybe this is the power of story that I was talking about. But I looked at my own story that I was writing, and I realized that for every project Bluebird, there's a Powell House. For every atrocity, committed in World War II, there was a Stefania Podgorska somewhere who was ready to stand up and do something about it. And we'll never know these people's names. We'll never know. But that doesn't mean that they weren't there. While Project Bluebird was sanctioning crimes against humanity, Powell House and the AFSC was winning the Nobel Peace Prize for their global humanitarian efforts. And I looked at my own work and I realized the light is there. Even when we think we can't see it, it does exist, and it always has. That's what history teaches us. And it's kind of what I looked down and realized my own story was teaching me, that light is there, and people have the ability to choose it. They have the ability to look at themselves and decide to choose it, to transform. No matter what their past has been, we have the ability to change. And I think there's an enormous amount of hope in that. And that's what I pulled out of my own story. There's the power of story, even when it's yours. But I hope that readers see that same thing.
I think so. I definitely got it. And yeah, like it was a terrifying time, but yeah, good came out of it. But yeah, you don't hear about it as much, but
that's right. And we focus on the bad, and we need to remember that the good has always been there and will always be there.
Definitely. Mike, you
I think that's a great segue. Sharon Cameron, thank you very much for taking the time at this late evening to join us. Suzanne, you were awesome. Congratulations. You did very well.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you guys for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you soon. And Sharon, get on that next book, okay?
I'm on it. I'm working.
Okay.